The Book of Heaven, Volume 3, Part 7. March 20th, 1900. Jesus is forced to chastise, and the victim's soul tries to placate him. Having received communion, I saw my sweet Jesus inviting me to go out with him, on the condition, however, that if I was to go with him, wherever I would see that Jesus was forced to send chastisements because of sins, I should not contend with him, so that he would not send them. With this condition we went out, going round the earth. At first I began to see areas not too far from us, which were all withered, especially at certain points. So turning to him I said, "Lord, how can these poor people go on if they lack the food to nourish themselves? Oh, please, you can do anything. Just as you made it wither, make it become green again." And since he had the crown of thorns, I stretched out my hand, telling him, "My good, what have these people done to you? Did they perhaps put this crown of thorns on you? Well, then give it to me, so you will be placated, and will give them food so as not to let them perish." And removing it from him, I pressed it onto my head. While I was doing this, Jesus told me, "It shows that I cannot take you with me, because taking you and being unable to do anything is the same." And I, "Lord, I have not done anything. Forgive me if you know that I have done evil, but oh, please take me with you." And he, "Your way of acting binds me everywhere." And I am not the one who does this. It is you yourself who make me operate in this way, because in being with you, I see that all things are yours. And if I did not care about your things, it seems to me that I would not care about your very self. Therefore you must forgive me if I act in this way, because I do it for love of you. And you must not send me away because of this. So we continued to go around. I did as much as I could not to tell him anything at certain points, so that he would not chastise, in order not to give him any occasion to make me withdraw and lose his lovable presence. But where I could not, I would begin to contend with him. We arrived at some place in Italy where they were making a plot, which was to cause a great disorder. But I did not understand what it was, because I began to say, "Lord, do not allow this. Poor people, how shall they go on?" Seeing that I insisted and wanted to prevent him, Jesus told me with empire, "Withdraw, withdraw," and removing a belt of nails and pins which he wore, sunken inside his flesh, and which made him suffer very much, he added, "Withdraw, and take this belt with you, for you will give me great relief." And I, "Yes, I will put it on myself in your place, but let me be with you." And he, "No, withdraw." And he said this with such empire that, unable to resist, in one instant I found myself inside myself, and I was unable to understand what that plot was about. March 25th, 1900. The incarnate Word is like sun for souls. This morning, my adorable Jesus, in the act of coming, told me, "Just as the sun is the light of the world, so did the Word of God, in incarnating himself, become the light of souls. And just as the material sun gives light in general, and to each one in particular, so much so that each one can enjoy it as if it were his own, in the same way, the Word, while giving light in general, is sun for each one in particular. So much so that each one can have this divine sun as if it were for himself alone. Who can say what I comprehended about this light, and the beneficial effects that abound in the souls who keep this sun as if it were their own? It seemed to me that, as the soul possesses this light, it dispels darkness, just as the material sun, by rising over our horizon, dispels the darkness of the night. If the soul is cold, this divine light warms her. If she is naked of virtues, it fecundates her. If she is inundated by the pestiferous disease of lukewarmness, with its heat, it absorbs that bad humor. In a word, so as not to be too long, this divine sun, introducing her into the center of its sphere, covers the soul with all its rays, and reaches the point of transforming the soul into its very light. After this, since I was feeling all weary, wanting to refresh me, Jesus told me, "This morning I want to delight in you." And he began to make his usual loving stratagems. April 1st, 1900. Passions changed into virtues. After waiting and waiting, my sweet Jesus made himself seen from inside my heart. I seemed to see a sun spreading its rays, and in looking into the center of this sun, I could see the face of our Lord. But what caused my amazement was to see many maidens clothed in white within my heart, with crowns on their heads, surrounding this divine sun, and nourishing themselves with the rays which this sun was spreading. Oh, how beautiful they were, modest, humble, all intent on Jesus, and delighting in him. Not knowing the meaning of this, with a little bit of concern, I asked Jesus to let me know who those maidens were. And Jesus told me, "These maidens used to be your passions, which now with my grace I have changed into as many virtues, which form my noble cortege, remaining all at my disposal. And I, as recompense, keep nourishing them with my continuous grace." Ah, Lord, yet I feel I am so bad that I am ashamed of myself. April 2nd, 1900. Jesus judges according to the will which one operates. This morning I had to suffer very much because of the absence of my dear Jesus. However, he repaid my pains by granting a desire of mine, of wanting to know something, which I had been yearning for a long time. Then, after going round and round in search of Jesus, now I called him with prayer, now with tears, now with singing. Who knows, he might be wounded by my voice, and so let himself be found. But it was all in vain. I repeated my moans. I asked about him to whomever I found. Finally, when my heart felt itself dying and could take no more, I found him. But I could see him from the back, and remembering about a resistance I made to him, which I will write in the book of the confessor, I asked for his forgiveness. And so it seems we placed ourselves in accord, so much so that he himself asked me what I wanted. And I said to him, "Be pleased to let me know your will about my state, especially what I must do when I find myself with little sufferings, and you do not come. And if you do come, it is almost like a shadow. So not seeing you, I feel my senses present within me, and finding myself in this position, I feel as if I were putting something of my own, and it were not necessary to wait for the coming of the confessor in order to get out of that state." And Jesus, "Whether you suffer or not, whether I come or not, your state is always of victim. More so, since this is my will and yours. And I judge not according to the works that one does, but according to the will with which one operates." And I, "My Lord, it is fine as you say, but it seems to me that I am there uselessly, and much time is wasted, and I feel a bother, a fear. And then having the confessor come, my soul is tormented that it might not be your will." And he, "Do you think it is a sin to have the confessor come?" And I, "No, but I fear it is not your will." And he, "It is sin that you must flee, even the shadow of it, but about the rest you must have no concern." And I, "If it were not your will, why remain there?" And he, It seems to me that my daughter wants to escape the state of victim, doesn't she?" And I, all blushing, said, "No, Lord, I'm saying this for those times in which you do not let me suffer and do not come. After all, let me suffer, and I will have no concern." And Jesus, "And to me it seems that you want to escape. Besides, do you know when I intend to come and communicate my pains to you, whether on the first, the second, the third, or even the last hour? So by distracting yourself from me and trying to get out, you occupy yourself with something else, and I, on coming, will not find you prepared, and will turn around and go somewhere else." And I, all frightened, "May this never be, O Lord! I want to know nothing but your most holy will." And he, "Remain calm, and wait for the confessor." Having said this, he disappeared. It seems I feel relieved of a heavy weight by this speaking of Jesus. But in spite of this, the sorrowful pain of when Jesus deprives me of himself has not lessened in me. April 9th, 1900. Abandonment in God. This morning, having received communion, I was in a sea of bitternesses, for I did not see my highest good, Jesus. I felt all of my interior alarmed, when in one instant he made himself seen and told me, almost reproaching me, "Don't you know that not abandoning oneself in me is wanting to usurp the rights of my divinity, giving me a great affront? Therefore abandon yourself, calm all of your interior in me, and you will find peace. And in finding peace, you will find me." Having said this, he disappeared like a flash, without letting himself be seen any more. Lord, you yourself keep me all abandoned and well clasped in your arms, so that I may never escape. Otherwise, I will always make little escapes. April 10th, 1900. The desires to see Jesus draw him to the soul. Blessed Jesus continues not to come. Oh God, what an unspeakable pain is his privation. I tried as much as I could to remain at peace, and all abandoned in him. But no, my poor heart could take no more. I did as much as I could to calm it, saying, "Heart of mine, let us wait a little longer. Who knows, he might come. Let us use some stratagems to draw him to come." So turning to him, I said, "Lord, come. It is getting late and you have not come yet. This morning I am trying to remain calm as much as I can, yet you don't let yourself be found. Lord, I offer you the martyrdom of your privation as an attestation of love and as a present to induce you to come. It is true that I am not worthy, but it is not because I am worthy that I look for you, but out of love, and because without you I feel life missing in me." And since he was not coming, I said to him, "Lord, either you come or I will tire you with my speaking. And when you get tired, even then are you not going to come?" But who can say all my nonsense? I told him so much of it that I would be too long if I wanted to say everything. After this, I just barely saw my sweet Jesus moving in my interior, as if he were waking up from a sleep. Then he showed himself more clearly, and transporting me outside of myself, he told me, "Just as the bird flaps its wings when it must fly, so does the soul flap the wings of humility at the flights of her desires. And in that flapping, she sends a magnet that draws me, in such a way that while she takes wing to come to me, I take wing to go to her." Ah, Lord, it shows that I lack the magnet of humility. If I could spread the magnet of humility everywhere on my path, I would not have to struggle so much, waiting and waiting for your coming. April 16th, 1900. The 3 signatures on the passport to enter beatitude on earth. Plot against the Church. After I went through bitter days of privation and of reproaches of blessed Jesus, because of my ingratitudes and resistances to his will and to his graces, this morning upon coming he told me, "My daughter, the passport to enter the beatitude that the soul can possess on this earth must be signed with 3 signatures, and these are resignation, humility, and obedience. Perfect resignation to my will is wax that melts our wills and makes them one. It is sugar and honey. However, at a small resistance to my will, the wax separates, the sugar becomes bitter, and the honey turns into poison. Now, it is not enough to be resigned, but the soul must be convinced that the greatest good for herself and the best way to glorify me is to always do my will. Here is the necessity of the signature of humility, because humility produces this knowledge. But who ennobles these 2 virtues? Who fortifies them? Who renders them persevering? Who chains them together in such a way that they cannot separate? Who crowns them? Obedience. Ah, yes, completely destroying one's will and everything that is material. Obedience spiritualizes everything, and like a crown places itself around them. So resignation and humility without obedience are subject to instability, but with obedience they will be fixed and stable. Here is the strict necessity of the signature of obedience, so that this passport may circulate in order to pass into the reign of the spiritual beatitude that the soul can enjoy down here. Without these three signatures, the passport will have no value, and the soul will be rejected by the reign of beatitude, and will be forced to remain in the reign of restlessness, of fears, and of dangers. And to her misfortune, she will have her own self as God, and this self will have the cortege of pride and of rebellion. After this he carried me outside of myself into a garden, which seemed to be the garden of the church. There I saw that 5 or 6 people, priests and secular, were being led astray and uniting with the enemies of the church. They were starting a revolution. How pitiful it was to see blessed Jesus crying over the sad state of these people. Then I looked in the air, and I saw a cloud of water, filled with large pieces of ice that were falling over the earth. Oh, what a disaster they caused over the crops and over humanity! But I hope that he will calm down. Then, more afflicted than before, I came back into myself. April 20th, 1900. The cross gives us the features and the likeness of Jesus. My adorable Jesus continues to come, for just a little, and like a shadow, and even when he comes, he does not say anything. This morning, after he renewed in me the pains of the cross, as many as 2 times, looking at me with tenderness, while I was suffering the spasm of the piercings of the nails, he told me, "The cross is a mirror in which the soul observes the divinity, and by reflecting herself in it, she acquires the features and the likeness which most resemble God." The cross must not only be loved, desired, but one must hold the very cross as an honor, a glory. This is to operate as God, and to become like God by participation, because I alone gloried in the cross and considered suffering an honor for me. And I loved it so much that in my whole life I did not want to be one moment without the cross. Who can say what I understood about the cross from this speaking of blessed Jesus? But I feel mute in expressing it with words. Oh Lord, I pray you to keep me always nailed to the cross, so that having this divine mirror ever before me, it may cleanse all my stains, and embellish me evermore unto your likeness. April 21st, 1900. More than sacrament, the cross seals God in the soul. As I was in my usual state, or rather, with a little bit of concern about something which it is not necessary to say here, my sweet Jesus on coming told me, "And they are sacred vessels, and every now and then it is necessary to dust them off. Your bodies are as many sacred vessels, in which I make my dwelling. Therefore it is necessary that I do some little dusting every now and then. That is, that I visit them with some tribulation, so that I may remain in them with more decorum. Therefore remain calm. Later, after I received communion, and he renewed in me the pains of the crucifixion, he added, "My daughter, how precious is the cross! Take a look. The sacrament of my body, in giving itself to the soul, unites her with me. It transmutes her to the point of becoming one with me. But as the species are consumed, the union, truly established, ceases. Not with the cross. The cross takes God and unites him with the soul forever, and it places itself with greater security as the seal. Therefore the cross seals God in the soul in such a way that there is never separation between God and the crucified soul." April 23rd, 1900. Resignation is oil that salves. This morning, finding myself outside of myself, I saw my sweet Jesus suffering very much, and I prayed him to share his pains with me. And he said to me, "You too suffer. Rather, I will take your place, and you will do for me the office of nurse." So it seemed that Jesus placed himself in my bed, and I, beside him, began to check his head, and removed one by one the thorns that were driven into it. Then I moved on to his body, and I visited all his wounds. I dried up the blood. I kissed them, but I had nothing with which to salve them in order to mitigate the spasm, when I saw that an oil was coming out of me. I took it and I salved the wounds of Jesus, but with some concern, for I did not understand what the meaning of that oil was coming out of me. But blessed Jesus made me understand that resignation to the divine will is oil, which, while salving and mitigating our pains, at the same time salves and mitigates the spasm of the wounds of Jesus. Then, after performing this office for my dear Jesus for quite a while, he disappeared, and I came back into myself. April 24th, 1900. The Eucharist and Suffering. This morning, having received communion, it seemed to me that the confessor was placing the intention of making me suffer the crucifixion, and at that very instant I saw my guardian angel, who laid me on the cross to make me suffer it. After this I saw my sweet Jesus, who compassionated me and told me, "Your refreshment is I, and my refreshment is your suffering." And he showed an unspeakable contentment for my suffering, and for the confessor, who by means of the obedience to suffer which he had given me, had procured this relief for him. Then he added, "Since the sacrament of the Eucharist is the fruit of the cross, I feel more disposed to concede suffering to you when you receive my body. In fact, in seeing you suffer, it seems to me that I continue my passion in you for the good of souls, not mystically, but really. And this is a great relief for me, as I collect the true fruit of my cross and of the Eucharist." After this he said, "Up until now it was obedience that made you suffer. Do you want me to amuse myself a little bit by renewing again in you the crucifixion with my own hands?" And I, though I felt great suffering, and still fresh the pains of the cross that had been renewed in me, said, Lord, I am in your hands. Do with me whatever you want. So all content, Jesus began to drive the nails into my hands and feet again. I felt such intensity of pain that I myself do not know how I remained alive. But I was content, because I was making Jesus content. Then after he bent the nails, placing himself near me, he began to say, How beautiful you are! But how much more does your beauty grow in your suffering? Oh, how dear you are to me! My eyes are wounded in looking at you, for they see my very image in you. And he said many other things, which it would be useless to repeat. First, because I am bad. Second, because not seeing myself as the Lord tells me, I feel confusion and blushing in saying these things. But I hope that the Lord will make me truly good and beautiful, and then, as my blushing would fade, I will be able to describe them. Therefore I stop here. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 3, Part 7. Fiat.